Welcome back to Overthinking Tech. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to set up OPNsense in Proxmox. Now to follow along, you're going to need a Proxmox node with at least 3 network interfaces. Those can be on the same PCIe device because I'm going to be showing you how to pass network bridges through to a virtual machine. This will still give us 2 dedicated interfaces for OPNsense, a LAN and a WAN, that are bridges associated with physical devices. This has the benefit of working on basically any system, including, in my case, an older system that doesn't have enough IOMMU groups or support IOMMU override. But there is the downside that this setup will only support speeds up to 10 gigabits per second on those network interfaces. If you want another video just explaining more about IOMMU and what's required to do PCIe pass-through, let me know in the video comments. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is simply log in to our Proxmox node. We can continue to ignore the no valid subscription. I'll show at some point how to resolve this error here. I'm just not going to include that in this video. If we go to the Proxmox node we want to use, in this case I just have the one that I called router, the first thing we're going to want to do is add storage. Now I'm already on the disks page here because that's the last thing I was looking at, but if you come down to disks and then go to ZFS, I currently have this 1 terabyte ADATA disk. I'm going to show you how to add another disk. Now, in order to do this, you will need a disk that is completely blank. This disk can't be already formatted or have anything on it, otherwise it won't show up. All we have to do then to create a new ZFS pool is give this a name and select the disks we want to add. In this case, I just have 1 disk, so I'm going to do RAID level single disk. If you have more than 1 disk, you can select whatever RAID level you want for ZFS. So these are RAID Zs. I'm going to leave compression on. This can help save some space on the disk with virtual images. A shift is fine, and then we just need to click create. So with that done, we should now have a disk that shows up here for ZFS. And if we do the little drop down by our node, we'll also see that that disk shows up there as well. And we can see statistics on it. We can also see what virtual machine disks are going to be present on that node. Now that we have storage, the next thing we need to do is upload an ISO to use as the installation file. Now we'll actually be uploading the ISO to the drive that Proxmox was installed on. If we look at our node here and we go to local, this is the drive that contains our Proxmox installation. We have this option here for ISO images, and we can upload by simply selecting our ISO. Now for OPNsense, if you're on the download page, you want to make sure that this is an ISO and not an IMG. So to do that, where it says VGA by default, we're going to change this to DVD and then click download. You can also change your mirror location if there's someplace better. Once that's finished, you should have your .bz2 file. We're just going to want to use something like 7-zip to go ahead and extract this before uploading it. Once it's finished extracting, we can just come over here to upload, select file, and then we should see our ISO image. Upload time will depend on how fast the drive is, as well as how fast your networking is. Once it's done uploading, we'll get this window here that says copying data. Once again, the amount of time this takes can depend on how fast your drive is. Wait until you see this task OK at the bottom before closing the window. So now we have our installation media. At this point, we're ready to create the virtual machine. So if we come to router, we can either click create VM here, or we can right click and hit create VM on the node we want. The VLAN ID is what OPNsense uses to identify these. You can see from the 2 virtual machines I have, they're at 100 and 101. There's really no reason to change this. It will automatically increment. And then we can also give this a name. For OS, we're going to do storage local. That's the only one that currently has ISOs on it. And then for the image, we just need to select our OPNsense image. Everything in system should be fine. Disks, everything here should be fine. You might want to change the disk size, but 32 gigabytes is a reasonable amount for an OPNsense install. I'm not going to include a cache on this, but this is something that we will discuss in my LAN cache video that is to come. CPU, I'm just going to increase this to 2 cores for the moment. That's depending on your network size, how many devices, how many people. You might need more or less cores. 2 is going to be plenty to do the installation here. For memory, I recommend increasing this a bit. I found that there's a fairly large amount of memory overhead that gets grouped in this. That should be plenty for most OPNsense installs, but what we'll see is that OPNsense thinks it has more memory available than what Proxmox tells us is available for the VM. For networking, we're going to select for the moment no network device, so we're not going to attach any networking. Oh, and actually before I forget, there's one more thing I want to change in memory. By default, ballooning memory is enabled, even though the minimum and the maximum are the same. I'm going to disable ballooning memory. I can't personally say whether or not it causes issues. I have heard that it can cause issues specifically with BSD, which is what OPNsense runs in. I'm going to leave start after created unchecked. I don't want this to start after it's been created. And then simply select finish. We'll see our virtual machine getting created here. It can take a moment for some of these fields to propagate. Once we have the OK status on created, we can come here and make edits to it. Now, before we start making any changes to the virtual machine itself, we want to go back to router and go to network. Now, I already have my network interfaces configured. You should have VMBR0 automatically. This one should have been created when the system was originally set up, and that's what has the IP address that we are accessing currently. You won't have VMBR1 or 2 like I have here. Now, the first thing to do is to make sure that all of your interfaces are set to auto start. So if you select an interface, you can click edit and then make sure auto start is enabled. Down the road, we'll want VMBR0 to be VLAN aware if you're following my tutorials. Don't change that, however, unless the interface on your network switch it's connected to already has VLANs configured. For VMBR1 and VMBR2, we need to know which of these physical interfaces we want to associate with the LAN and which one we want to associate with the WAN connection on OPNsense. So for right now, once you've gone ahead and set all your physical interfaces, the ENP 4, 5, and 6, to auto start, hit apply configuration, and then we'll navigate to our shell. From here, you can go ahead and install NetTools. Oh, gotta include the install. I already have NetTools installed, so this won't do anything. Once you have NetTools installed, run ifconfig. Here, we can see our physical interfaces. You'll also see any of the bridged interfaces you have created. What's going to be different about this than what you might be used to is all of these are going to show as up, even if the physical interface isn't connected to anything. That's because when we set auto start, it automatically sets these to active. However, when you connect and disconnect an interface, you should see some packets get sent. So you'll be able to determine which interface you want for your LAN and which one you want for your WAN simply by testing and seeing when packets move between them. Once you know which physical interface you want for your LAN and which one you want for your WAN, we can come back to the network page and go create Linux bridge. The name should autofill, doesn't matter what the name is. We want auto start to be selected. We want VLAN aware to be unselected. Even if you're planning on using VLANs, which I do in OPNsense, we're still going to leave all of these as non-VLAN aware. For the port, we're going to enter ENP4S0 or whichever physical interface you want associated with this. And then we can leave a comment, such as LAN, to tell us that this is going to be the LAN port for OPNsense. If I hit create, this is going to fail because you can't have two virtual bridges on the same physical interface. Once you've created the two bridges that you want to use for OPNsense, go ahead and hit apply configuration. Make sure you click that apply button, otherwise we won't be able to use them later. Quick note I thought of while editing. These bridges shouldn't be used for anything else besides OPNsense. This is something I've tested, and OPNsense won't give any error messages, but can have some weird failures if you try assigning these bridges to other virtual machines simultaneously, at least in the use case where I tried passing through VLANs and stuff. So my recommendation is that the bridges and the physical interfaces you pass through to OPNsense, you only use for OPNsense. Any other virtual machines running on this Proxmox node should use the VMBR0 bridge that your Proxmox node is using. If we come to the OPNsense VM we just created and go to hardware, under add, we're going to select add network device, and then we're going to select our LAN and our WAN. So if I add LAN first, VMBR1 LAN. Under model, I'm going to leave this as VirtIO paravirtualization. There's some documentation that recommends using Intel E1000. Intel E1000 works excellently, but it's limited to 1 gig speed. And I want to be able to support faster speeds than 1 gig in OPNsense. Make sure we unselect firewall. We're also going to leave our VLAN tag as no VLAN tag. If you type in a VLAN tag or click the button, simply delete it to get back to no VLAN tag. I will be using VLAN tags in OPNsense. I run, I think, about 7 or 8 VLANs. But we are going to leave VLAN tags and VLAN awareness off for these interfaces when we pass them into OPNsense. And then we'll just configure VLANs in OPNsense like we normally do. Click add to add that, and then we'll do the exact same thing with the WAN interface. Once again, firewall off, VirtIO, no VLAN tag, and add. Now these get assigned as net 0 and net 1. This is going to come up later. Okay, so now that we've added those network devices, we're ready to start the VM. Simply click Start. If for some reason yours fails to start, make sure that you clicked Apply Configuration when we set up networking in the node. Now, I'm not going to do a configuration during the install. I'm going to wait and do that after the system has been installed. I am going to do manual interface assignment, however. I'm going to say no to link aggregations, no to VLANs. Now we see here that we have two network interfaces, VTnet0 and VTnet1. These net0 and net1 are associated with the net0 and net1 of our hardware interfaces. So if we come to hardware, we'll see that under net1 and net0, we have our randomly assigned MAC address, B9F8 for net0. And here we'll see that for net0, we have our B9F8. So for WAN, I'm going to base the assignment off of the order I did them in here. In my case, VMBR2 is WAN, and that's on net 1. So in the console here, I'm going to do VTnet1 for my WAN, And for LAN, VTnet 0. And then enter again. Yep, LAN is 1, LAN is 0. Proceed, yes. Okay, so it looks like OPNsense wants the WAN to actually be connected during this setup. The reason is because if we look back at the hardware we set up, these show as up. OPNsense doesn't know that these aren't connected, so it thinks there should be something responding on it. At this stage, we can log in as installer. The default password should be OPNsense. OPNsense, all lowercase. This installation is going to be exactly the same as if you were doing it on bare metal. So I'm just going to continue with default. I'm going to do install UFS. And then I'm going to select the 32 gigabyte partition here. The 1 gigabyte is the DVD-ROM ISO image. We don't want to select that one. We want the 32 gig one. I'll say yes to the 8 gigs of swap space. Just in case the system does run out of memory, having swap space there can be helpful. And then of course the speed here will depend on the hardware that you have connected. Once it's done, I highly recommend changing your root password. Though if you're planning to import a configuration, the root password in the configuration is what will get set as your root password after it's been imported. Complete install by exit and rebooting. At this stage, we can go to this hardware tab, and under CD DVD, we can select this and click remove. That way it won't boot to that disk when it reboots the system. So you can see here both VTnet 0 and VTnet 1 get shown as up, even if they're not actually connected. With that, we should see that we have both a WAN and a LAN IP address. The WAN IP address is going to be whatever was assigned by the upstream gateway, and the LAN should just be the default 168.1.1. Now that this is done, we need to finish setting up OPNsense. Now, depending on how your network is configured, that can vary in terms of what that setup looks like. One of the easiest things to do is to simply connect the LAN port that you're using here directly to a system that you can do the setup from. So if I go ahead and do that now. So I went ahead and I connected that LAN port directly, I actually connected it to a Windows 10 virtual machine here for the sake of this demonstration. We can now navigate to the 192.168.1.1, and we should be able to log in with root and whatever you set that root password to, unless you didn't change it, in which case the password will still be OPNsense. Again, change your root passwords. Now from here, if we look at our dashboard, we'll be able to see our network interfaces. Both of them are going to show up as 10 gig base T regardless of what physical interface we have connected. It doesn't mean we can do 10 gig speed. What that means is the VirtIO drivers present themselves as 10 gig to OPNsense. We'll still be limited by the physical network interface if that's below 10 gig. If it's above 10 gig, we'll still be limited to 10 gig speed. This is a downside of not doing PCIe pass-through, but at least in my use case, I didn't have a choice, and this is a system that does work on everything. Now, one side note here that I thought was worth pointing out, if we look currently at memory usage, OPNsense indicates that it has the full 4 gigabytes that I gave it, But if we look at Proxmox and we look at the hardware, actually we want the summary for this OPNsense node, we see here that it says there's over 3 gigabytes used and we have less than 20% of our memory available. This seems to be associated with the fact that there's quite a bit of overhead for just running a virtual machine, and OPNsense doesn't realize how much of that overhead has actually been used. I haven't encountered any issues with this because I haven't had an OPNsense config hit the full memory point, but that's something that you probably want to be aware of. So now that we're in OPNsense, we can upload a configuration file by going to System and then Configuration. Select Backups. This is also where you can download the configuration file from a previous OPNsense install. If you've never used OPNsense before, then just go ahead, use this exactly like you would a new setup, and start watching OPNsense tutorials. The last thing I'm going to show today is how to change a configuration file to make it work with this installation. So if I take a look at an existing OPNsense configuration file, one of the things we'll see here is that my interfaces show up as RE0 and RE1. That's because I was previously using 2 Realtek NICs that presented themselves as RE0 and 1 to OPNsense. And if I tried importing this currently as is into this OPNsense configure or this OPNsense installation, I wouldn't be able to just directly import it and hit the ground running, because OPNsense wouldn't know what interfaces to associate with what part of the configuration. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit this configuration file before importing it. To start with, I'm going to look for RE0, which was previously my WAN interface, as we can see here. And now I want my WAN interface to be VTnet1. So if I take a look at this configuration file, I can just replace RE0 with VTnet1. I don't recommend clicking replace all. For RE1, we just need to set this to VTnet0. And then find next, replace. This will also rename the VLAN interfaces. So you'll do this a bunch. I'm not going to go through all of these, but if you just replace all of the references to the old NIC with the correct name for the new NIC, you can import this configuration file via system configuration restore. Oh, you have to choose first. Once you've imported that configuration file, your OPNsense instance should be restored, and we can look at interfaces and see that I also have VLANs configured here as well. Even though in Proxmox I left everything as VLAN unaware, you can configure VLANs in OPNsense and use them exactly how you would if you were on bare metal. So that has been setting up OPNsense in Proxmox. Thanks for making it to the end if you made it this far. It was definitely a longer video. Stay tuned as I have Nginx, Unbound, LAN cache, and Pi-hole tutorials coming for the same Proxmox node.